If you can keep a secret, the most delicious food America ever produced has all but vanished from our tables. These were the meals that built a nation, fed families through the toughest times, then disappeared without a trace, as if the farm kitchens they came from were never real at all. What happened to the dinners that once kept whole families strong? And why does their disappearance feel like losing part of who we are? Today, we're bringing back 30 forgotten farmers' dinners, dishes your grandparents savored, but that your children may never taste unless we preserve them. When the Great Depression gripped America, rabbit became the answer when chicken was a luxury. Trapped from the wild or raised in backyard hutches, rabbits provided protein when other meats were scarce. The magic happened in a cast-iron skillet slick with rendered lard, that precious cooking fat our grandparents saved and reused. The rabbit pieces, soaked in tangy buttermilk overnight, were dredged in seasoned flour and fried golden. The gravy made afterward was simplicity itself, just pan drippings whisked with flour and milk, but it filled every corner of the plate and every empty stomach around the table. My Uncle Roy still talks about how his mother could make a single rabbit feed 9 hungry children on their Kansas farm. That satisfying crunch of perfectly fried rabbit is a sound that's all but vanished from American kitchens. When the fire was low and nobody wanted to scrub another pot, farm families turned to the cool cellar for dinner. These vibrant plates didn't need heat to feel warm in both color and satisfaction. You pulled them straight from the icebox on a Sunday night, hard-boiled eggs that had been steeped with pickled beets in a sweet, tangy vinegar bath. After a day together, the whites turned a magnificent magenta while the yolks mellowed to a creamy consistency. My grandmother served these with cold biscuits left over from breakfast and maybe a spoonful of jam on the side. It was quiet food, humble. Yes, but never boring. The tartness of the beets, the soft salt of the eggs, the crumb of day-old biscuit. It was all done with intention. We traded meals like this for convenience and forgot what it meant to feel fed without fuss. These weren't fancy sandwiches, meant for photographs. They were greasy, sharp, and a little sloppy, just the way a long workday demanded. Salt pork, the preserved fat and meat from the pig's belly, was a staple before refrigeration became common. Pan-fried until the edges crisped like bark, it offered an intensely savory foundation. The vinegar slaw, a raw mix of cabbage, onion, and white vinegar with just a pinch of sugar, cut through the fat and woke up tired taste buds. Farmers packed these sandwiches in wax paper and stuffed them into saddlebags, where they'd warm slightly by lunchtime but still taste just right. Mrs. Johnson, down the road from our farm, would slice her salt pork so thin you could almost see through it, then fry it until it shattered between your teeth. Salt pork has mostly vanished from store shelves now, but once this sandwich fed the backbone of rural America. This wasn't a quick weeknight dinner. Molasses-baked beans were an all-day affair that perfumed farmhouses with sweet, smoky anticipation. The beans soaked overnight, then slow-baked with onion, mustard, and deep, sticky molasses until they were dark and tender enough to break with a spoon. The top was covered in crushed saltines, browned until crisp and flaking like dry pie crust. Every family had their own version. Some threw in a piece of salt pork or a stray sausage if they had it. But it was the molasses that turned these humble beans into something rich and special. When my father was a boy in rural Ohio, Saturday was Bean Day, and the smell would rise through the farmhouse like a promise. Baked beans today come from cans, fast and flat, missing that roasted depth you can only get from patience. When the cupboard was nearly bare, cornmeal mush stepped in to fill empty stomachs. Just cornmeal, salt, water, and perhaps a pinch of thyme, cooked low and slow until thick, then poured into a loaf pan to set. The next day, it was sliced and pan-fried in whatever fat was available, lard, bacon grease, or butter on special occasions. The result was crisp on the edges but soft in the middle. The sorghum, thick, dark, and sweet, was poured hot from the jar and turned something plain into something profound. This was a meal from the South that spread across farm states during the Great Depression. I lived on this during the Dust Bowl years, my great-uncle used to tell me. Made me strong enough to plow from sunrise to sunset. It filled you up and kept you going. It didn't need meat, didn't need variety. It wasn't a backup plan, it was the plan. This was the kind of dinner you made when teeth were weak, appetites were small, but care was still strong, a gentle meal that nourished body and soul. The spinach was boiled down soft, drained, and folded with cream, butter, and a whisper of nutmeg. Then came the egg, gently poached so the yolk stayed golden and runny, a rich counter to the soft green below. Toast points, sliced triangles of day-old bread crisped in a pan with a little butter, were there to give the whole dish a structure and to soak up every last bit of goodness. My aunt remembers her grandmother making this for her after school. It was the first time I realized food could be both simple and special, she told me. These days it's gone from most tables, written off as too mild, too soft, too old-fashioned. But those who remember it still talk about the calm it brought. When summer came, heavy and hot, when the cows barely stirred in the shade and kitchen work near a wood stove became unbearable, cold buttermilk soup offered blessed relief. The buttermilk was sharp and sour, sometimes cut with a little cream if you had it, and filled with crisp slices of fresh cucumber straight from the garden. Chopped dill added a clean green bite that lingered on the tongue. You poured it into chipped bowls and ate it with a spoon that clinked against the sides, the coldness rushing through your chest like a breeze across open fields. My father would come in from haying, drenched in sweat, recalled my neighbor who grew up on a dairy farm, and this was all he wanted, said it cooled him from the inside out. Somewhere between air conditioning and fast food, this little bowl of cold clarity disappeared, but it was the kind of food that felt like a cool cloth across your forehead. During World War II, meat was rationed, and frugality ruled every kitchen. Chipped beef, dried, salty slivers of preserved beef, was a staple in both military rations and rural homes. It earned colorful nicknames from soldiers that aren't fit for polite company, but despite the jokes, it fed a nation through hard times. Rehydrated in a skillet with cream, butter, and a little black pepper, it became a thick, rich gravy. Instead of toast, farmers in the South used fried grit cakes, leftover grits chilled in a pan, sliced into squares, and crisped in bacon fat until golden. My friend's father, who served in the Navy, would make this every Thursday for his family, long after the war ended. "It reminds me of making it through," he'd say while pouring the creamy sauce over those crispy cakes. This humble dish represented resourcefulness and the ability to find comfort even in the strictest rationing. When the tomatoes refused to ripen before frost threatened, farm cooks turned to innovation rather than disappointment. Green tomatoes, firm, tart, and abundant at season's end, became the star of a sandwich that celebrated making do. Sliced thick, dredged in cornmeal, and fried until golden, the tomatoes provided a crisp, tangy foundation. The onions, sweet and sharp, were grilled or pan-seared until soft, but the secret weapon was the mustard butter. Softened butter mixed with spicy mustard and sometimes a pinch of sugar, spread thick on toasted bread. Mr. Williams, whose farm bordered ours, would make these sandwiches the morning after the first frost warning, having harvested all his green tomatoes by lantern light the night before. The sandwich was loud, crispy, tangy, creamy, and bold. It was also a meal of defiance, a way to eat what was ready rather than wait for perfection. In farm kitchens, that kind of thinking was survival. Sunday's roast became Tuesday's casserole in the waste-nothing world of farm cooking. This hearty bake took the last slices of weekend meat, beef, pork, or whatever you had, and chopped them fine, stretching them into another full meal. Mixed in a casserole dish with buttery egg noodles, tangy sauerkraut, a little sour cream, and a pinch of caraway seed, it baked into something warm, filling, and deeply familiar. Wednesday was always sauerkraut and noodles, remembered my friend's mother who grew up in rural Ohio. You could tell what day it was by what was cooking. German and Eastern European immigrants brought these flavors with them, and those tastes settled into the soil of American farmland. This bake became a regular in the Midwest and Appalachia, places where nothing got thrown out and second day. Meals were often the best of the week. Today, we throw out leftovers without a thought. The late garden's bounty brought oversized marrow squash, those zucchini that escaped picking and grew to the size of small baseball bats. Rather than discard these giants as too tough or seedy, clever farm cooks transformed them into edible vessels for savory stuffing. Hollowed out and roasted until tender, the squash were filled with a savory mix of breadcrumbs, small amounts of precious sausage, onions, and garden sage. Sometimes the stuffing included chopped apples or dried cranberries in autumn. Mrs. Cooper, who ran the farm stand down the road would save her biggest squash specifically for stuffing, saying the extra room meant extra filling, which was the best part anyway. It was hearty, filling, and served in thick slices like a meatloaf wrapped in a vegetable. On farms across America, it was a way to use up the oversized squash that nobody knew what to do with. But, in truth, it was better than many of the meats it was meant to replace. Gooseberries, those tart little green fruits that grew wild along fence rows and barn edges, were once a cook's secret weapon for transforming ordinary cuts of meat into something special. Cooked down with sugar into a tangy glaze, they clung to seared pork like a second skin. The meat, often from a thin chop or shoulder cut, was browned, hard in a cast-iron skillet before being finished in the glaze. Beside it came okra, sliced, dredged in cornmeal, and fried until golden. Mr. Thompson, whose family had farmed the same land for generations, would go hunting for wild gooseberries, with his grandchildren each summer, turning the expedition into both a game and a grocery run. This meal celebrated the brief window when gooseberries were ripe and okra was tender. Usually in mid to late summer, it was a seasonal treat that marked time in the farming year as surely as any calendar. On the farm, nothing went to waste, especially not the liver, which was tender, iron-rich, and deeply flavored. Rabbit liver was particularly prized for its delicate taste compared to stronger-flavored beef or chicken livers. It was soaked in milk to soften its bite, then seared with onions until it browned at the edges and melted in the middle. Next to it came the sorghum cornbread, a slightly sweet, dense bread made with stone-ground cornmeal and thick black syrup baked until the crust browned and cracked. My neighbor's grandmother insisted this meal be eaten in silence to properly respect what the animal gave us. Kids often turned up their noses at liver, but as you grew older, so did your taste for it. Today, rabbit liver is almost impossible to find, and even those who hunt rarely keep it. But back then, the dish was a mark of respect to the animal, and a recognition that true stewardship meant using every part of what the land provided. Breakfast that felt like supper, that's what tomato gravy delivered on cold mornings when farm work demanded serious fuel. The gravy started with bacon grease or lard, flour browned in the fat, then stirred with chopped tomatoes, fresh or canned, until it thickened into something smooth, tangy, and red. A pinch of sugar brought balance, a dash of pepper gave heat. Poured hot over a wedge of skillet-baked cornbread, it soaked in fast, turning crumb into gold. The ham came next, fried bits or scraps from the bone scattered on top like a garnish. "My daddy wouldn't touch oatmeal," an elderly woman from eastern Tennessee told me, said tomato gravy and cornbread was the only proper way to start a day working tobacco. This meal lingered, filling every corner of your morning. It was common across the South, especially in Appalachian kitchens where tomatoes were always in the pantry and cornbread never far behind. A bowl that smelled like winter survival, turnip green stew, was a staple when fresh produce was scarce but root cellars were still stocked with last fall's harvest. The greens were chopped rough and simmered with fatback, thick, salty cuts of pork belly that melted slowly into the broth. The stew was thin but rich, flavored with onion, garlic, and vinegar, then dotted with dumplings made from cornmeal, and a touch of lard. The dumplings steamed as they cooked, puffing up into soft yellow clouds that floated above the greens. "My great-grandmother could feed 12 people with 2 turnips and a piece of fatback," remarked a friend whose family had farmed in Georgia for generations. "And nobody left the table hungry. You didn't need meat to make this stew satisfying. The fatback did the talking, providing richness and depth that transformed simple ingredients into something filling and nourishing through the coldest months." Hominy, dried corn treated with lime, was once a staple across rural America, offering a different texture and flavor than fresh corn or cornmeal. When rehydrated, drained, and fried in a skillet slick with leftover sausage fat, it transformed into something magical. Each kernel popped and crisped, turning golden and savory with edges that sizzled. A splash of buttermilk on the side or over the top brought tang tang and cut the richness. "Whenever I smell sausage cooking," said an elderly man at a county fair, "I still expect fried hominy to follow. Some smells get into your bones." Children would dash to the table when they smelled the distinct nutty aroma of frying hominy, a sign that a hearty breakfast was minutes away. Today, you'll barely find hominy unless you know where to look, and few remember how to fry it right. But for those who grew up hearing it pop in the skillet, the memory is clear. During the war years, when fresh meat was scarce, canned salmon became an unexpected hero in farm kitchens. This humble bake transformed pantry staples into a dish that could stretch to feed a crowd on pennies. The salmon, pink, briny, and packed with bones that softened during cooking, was mixed with mashed potatoes, chopped onions, an egg or two, and some parsley if you had it. Packed into a buttered dish and topped with crushed saltines, it baked into something greater than the sum of its parts. My grandmother would make this on the day before payday, when the pantry was nearly bare, but the family still needed feeding. It wasn't glamorous, but it filled stomachs and provided nutrients when fresh food was hard to come by. Today, salmon is a premium fillet, not something baked with potatoes in a chipped casserole dish. But this recipe was a triumph of invention that kept many families nourished through lean times. As we look back on these forgotten farmers' dinners, we're reminded of a time when making do wasn't just a necessity, it was an art form. These dishes tell stories of resilience, creativity, and the deep connection between people and the land that fed them. Maybe it's time to bring some of these classics back to our tables, not just as nostalgia, but as wisdom from those who knew how to transform necessity into deliciousness. If you've enjoyed this journey through America's forgotten farm kitchen, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more delicious dives into food history. Let us know in the comments which of these forgotten dishes you remember or would like to try. Until next time, happy cooking and happy eating.